Hello. A storm of steel and fire swept across the land, 2,000 soldiers marching to crush a tiny clan. But standing in their way were just 80 samurai, and they refused to die quietly. The dawn mist rolled over the valley like a living spirit, swallowing the reeds and willows along the Anegawa River. In that pale, trembling light, 80 men waited, samurai of the Azai and Asakura clans, their armor damp with dew, their banners limp and ghostly. Beyond the haze, the thunder of 2,000 Oda Tokugawa warriors gathered like the growl of a storm yet unseen. Captain Saito Nobumasa knelt beside the riverbank, his hand tracing the reflection of the morning sky in the water. 80, he murmured, his voice calm, almost reverent. 80 souls against 1,000 blades, but a single spark may set the world aflame. Behind him, the young warrior Ichiro tightened the cords of his helmet. My lord, if we fall today, will our names be remembered? Nobumasa turned, his eyes like sharpened steel. The world remembers those who die without fear, and fear, Ichiro, is the only enemy that outnumbers us. Far to the east, war drums began to beat. The invaders were coming, Oda's men in crimson armor, the Tokugawa banners glinting gold under the first rays of the sun. Horses snorted, spears glittered, and the earth began to tremble. The samurai formed a crescent line on the riverbank, their yari, spears, braced in the mud. They knew no reinforcements would come. Their lords were miles away, already engaged in chaos. But within that stillness, the 80 men drew a shared breath, a silent pact. The air thickened with courage and resolve. Above them, a crane flew, cutting across the fog. Nobumasa watched it and whispered, "Even a crane faces the storm with grace." As the first arrows whistled through the mist, the small band of samurai shouted their war cry, not for victory, but for honor that would echo through centuries. The sun clawed its way through the mist, spilling gold upon the river's restless surface. For a fleeting instant, everything shimmered: armor, blades, and the trembling reeds, before the storm of steel began. Oda's vanguard advanced first, 300 men shouting their lord's name as they charged into the shallows. The water splashed crimson as the first arrows fell, a deadly rain loosed by Nobumasa's archers hidden among the willows. Every shaft sang with purpose. Each arrow found a throat, an eye, a heart. But still the enemy came. "Hold the line," Nobumasa roared, his voice cutting through the chaos like a temple bell. He leapt forward, slicing down a foot soldier whose pike barely grazed his shoulder. The sound of blades clashing against steel echoed like thunder rolling down from the mountains. Ichiro, young and burning with fervor, stood at the river's edge. He met a mounted samurai head-on, driving his yari upward into the horse's chest. The beast screamed, collapsing in a violent spray of water and mud. Ichiro fell to his knees, gasping, and then rose again, face spattered with blood, eyes blazing with something ancient and terrible. On the far bank, the Oda commander laughed. 80 men? They seek death. He spat, signaling another wave. 200 more surged forward. But the defenders moved like shadows, every strike a dance between life and nothingness. The samurai had turned the river into a labyrinth of death. Spears struck from behind rocks, arrows from the reeds. Their small number made them fluid, unpredictable, a storm condensed into human form. At one point, Nobumasa found himself surrounded by 5 enemies. He parried left, spun right, and the 5th man's head rolled into the river, floating downstream like a flower offered to the gods. The enemy hesitated. Fear began to stir among them, not from numbers, but from the sight of men who did not fear to die. When the dust settled for a moment, Ichiro looked at his commander, panting. "They keep coming." Nobumasa nodded, blood running down his cheek. "Then we will keep standing. The river will remember us." And so the second wave broke upon them, louder, heavier, relentless. Yet the 80 samurai did not yield. Their cries rose with the wind, and the Anegawa began to run red. By midday, the mist had burned away, revealing the full fury of Anegawa. The once gentle river now churned red and black, filled with broken banners, drifting corpses and shattered spears. The cries of men and horses mingled with the buzz of flies beginning their grim feast. The 80 had shrunk, 63 remained. Yet their eyes burned brighter than before. They fought no longer for life, but for legend. On the far ridge, Oda's commander, Lord Sakuma Yashiharu, watched with growing irritation. 60 men, he muttered, and they defy an army. His aide bowed low. My lord, shall we crush them with the cavalry? Sakuma's lip curled. Do it. Sweep the river clean. Moments later, the pounding of hooves thundered down the slope. A tide of mounted warriors, lances gleaming like sunlight on ice. The riverbank shook, but Nobumasa was waiting. Archers, to the willows, he ordered. Spearmen, draw them in. Ichiro blinked, confused for a heartbeat, then saw the pattern. The willow grove curved inward like a crescent, a natural funnel. As the cavalry charged, the samurai retreated deliberately, step by step, feigning exhaustion. The riders roared, tasting victory, until they plunged into the trap. From the shadows, arrows hissed like serpents. Horses reared and screamed as shafts found their marks. The first ranks fell. The rest stumbled upon them. Then came the spearmen, 30 men slamming forward in perfect unison. Their yari braced low. The impact was thunderous. Horses impaled, riders thrown. The formation shattered like pottery under a hammer. Ichiro fought within the chaos, each heartbeat a blur of sound and fury. A rider swung down at him. He ducked, cut upward, the blade catching sunlight and blood alike. Around him, comrades moved with grim precision. No words, only breath and rhythm. Within minutes, the cavalry charge disintegrated. Bodies clogged the shallows. Sakuma's banner trembled as confusion rippled through his ranks. From the crest of the hill, Nobumasa's voice rose. Steady, commanding, almost serene. Now, burn the willow bank. Torches flared. Flames leapt up the trunks, and smoke rolled across the river. The enemy's retreat turned to panic. Through the firelight, the samurai appeared as spirits, silhouettes of vengeance, cutting down shadows in the smoke. Ichiro, his face blackened with soot, looked to his commander. You knew the fire would trap them. Nobumasa's lips curved in a thin, weary smile. In chaos, even the weak can appear as gods. As night crept upon Anegawa, the flames still danced on the river's skin, and the legend of the 80 began to take root in the hearts of those who survived to tell it. The night descended like a funeral shroud over Anegawa. Smoke drifted through the valley, carrying with it the scent of ash, sweat, and blood. The willows still glowed faintly with dying embers, their shadows swaying across the corpses that littered the bank. The cries of the wounded were muffled beneath the whisper of the river, as if the water itself sought to wash away the memory of what had transpired. Nobumasa walked among his men in silence. 42 remained. Some sat motionless, gazing into the fire. Others sharpened their blades, though there was little edge left to hone. Ichiro crouched near the river, washing his bloodied hands, watching the red swirl fade into the current. He spoke without looking up. Sensei, I thought honor was something beautiful. But here, he gestured to the chaos around him. It smells of rot. Nobumasa stopped behind him, the glow of the fire dancing in his eyes. Honor is not clean, Ichiro. It is born from the mud and the blood. To walk the samurai path is to hold beauty in one hand and death in the other. A breeze whispered through the reeds. Somewhere in the distance, a wounded horse neighed, its cry carrying across the water like a ghost's lament. The younger men shivered, yet Nobumasa stood unmoving, his silhouette carved against the firelight, a statue of resolve. He turned to his warriors. Tomorrow they will come again. 2,000 still breathe, and they hunger for vengeance. Tonight we rest. Tomorrow we become the storm. One of the older samurai, his arm bound with torn silk, laughed hoarsely. A storm of 42 against a sea of men? Perhaps the gods will watch in amusement. Nobumasa nodded, his gaze lifted toward the stars. Then let us give them something worthy to remember. Ichiro lay awake long after the others had fallen silent. The stars above were countless, cold, and distant. He thought of his home, his mother's voice, the scent of plum blossoms after rain. A strange peace settled over him, not the peace of safety, but of acceptance. In the distance, the enemy's campfires glittered like a second constellation along the far ridge. He counted them 10, 20, 100. Each one was a promise of death waiting to descend. He whispered into the darkness, "Tomorrow, the river will drink again." And somewhere beyond the smoke, Nobumasa's quiet voice answered, "Let it drink deeply, Ichiro. Let it remember our names." The wind carried their words into the night, and the embers flickered, like fading stars over the battlefield that awaited the dawn. The dawn came blood-red. Clouds hung low over the valley, and the rising sun burned through them like a blade through silk. Dew clung to armor and banners alike, the breath of the earth before the slaughter. The river Anegawa shimmered faintly, no longer pure, but heavy with silt and memory. Nobumasa rose before the others, kneeling in the damp grass, his sword laid before him. He whispered the morning sutra, his voice steady, unbroken. Around him, the remaining 42 men performed the same rite, each one murmuring prayers not for victory, but for clarity. To die without confusion, to fall as a single flame, not a fading ember. Ichiro watched him quietly. There was something sacred in the rhythm of the men's movements, as if the ritual itself could hold back fate. He approached his commander, bowing deeply. "My lord," he said, "the scouts report the enemy moves before sunrise. Thousands." Nobumasa did not look up. "Good. Then the gods will not have to wait." The sound reached them soon after, a low, rumbling growl, like thunder beneath the earth. Drums. The enemy's march began, echoing across the valley in perfect, merciless rhythm. 2,000 men advancing, shields gleaming, banners snapping in the wind. Ichiro's pulse quickened. His hands trembled, though not from fear, from the unbearable weight of the moment. "Can 40 men stop a tide?" he asked. Nobumasa turned, eyes like tempered steel. "We do not stop the tide. We teach it to remember the shore." The warriors lined up along the riverbank, their armor patched, blades nicked and dull. Yet in that moment they looked more divine than human. Their discipline had hardened into serenity. Their courage had transcended fear. As the enemy drew near, the air thickened. Arrows darkened the sky, a storm of death. Shields rose. Some men fell, struck before the first clash. But those who remained did not flinch. Nobumasa raised his sword toward the heavens. "Let the gods witness us," he cried. And then the roar, 40 voices against 2,000, rolled across the battlefield like thunder. They charged, not as soldiers but as spirits unleashed. Ichiro ran beside his commander, his blade singing through the wind. The first impact was cataclysmic. Steel on steel, screams, dust, blood. The river shook with the weight of men and destiny. The Oda ranks reeled. They had expected exhaustion, fear, surrender. But what they faced was something else entirely. The calm fury of men who had already accepted death. For every samurai who fell, 2 invaders followed him into the mud. By the time the sun cleared the clouds, the river was once again veiled in mist, but now it smelled of iron and glory. Ichiro, breathless, looked to Nobumasa. "We still stand," he whispered. Nobumasa smiled faintly, wiping blood from his face. "Then let them come again." By mid-morning, the battlefield had turned to mire. The once shallow river ran thick with blood and broken armor, its current dragging corpses toward the reeds like silent ferrymen to the afterlife. The cries of war still echoed from both banks, the clash of steel, the shouts of men, the whinnies of dying horses. Only 27 samurai remained. Yet to the enemy, it seemed as though an army of ghosts fought in their place. Every charge met invisible blades. Every advance was swallowed by chaos. "Lord Sakuma," watching from his command ridge, slammed his fist against his armor. Enough! Sweep the river. End them. And so the final tide began. 1,000 soldiers descending into the shallows, trampling the fallen beneath their feet, banners whipping in the wind. The ground itself trembled beneath their weight. But Nobumasa had been waiting for this moment. He stood knee-deep in the river. His men fanned out behind him in two thin lines. Ichiro, bruised and bleeding, knelt beside him. "My lord, we can't hold them all." Nobumasa's lips curved into a calm, strange smile. "We will not hold them. We will divide them." As the first enemy ranks reached the center of the river, Nobumasa gave the signal. A single cry, long and sharp, cutting through the din. At once, his warriors split apart like wings opening to flight. Half turned upstream, the rest downstream, drawing the enemy with them. The invaders, seeing what seemed like retreat, roared in triumph and followed, unaware of the river's secret. The Anegawa's middle stretch was a labyrinth of hidden mud pits and sharp stones beneath the water's surface. Horses stumbled, men sank, armor dragged them down as they tried to wade forward. The formation fractured, confusion spreading like fire through dry grass. Ichiro led the left flank, striking from behind a fallen tree. He cut down 3 men in swift, brutal silence, then vanished into the reeds. His comrades struck from all sides, unseen, their movements guided by memory of the land they'd fought for. From the center of the river, Nobumasa lifted his spear high. Now! Hidden archers emerged from the western bank, a handful of wounded men who had lain silent among the corpses since dawn. Their arrows rained down like divine punishment, finding the unprotected faces of the drowning soldiers. Panic rippled through the Oda ranks. What had seemed victory turned to madness. Shouts of command dissolved into screams for help. The river, once a battlefield, became a grave. Ichiro waded through the chaos toward Nobumasa. His armor cracked, his sword broken halfway. "The tide turns, my lord." But Nobumasa's gaze was distant, fixed on the far ridge where Sakuma's banner fluttered. "The tide never turns, Ichiro," he said softly. "It only remembers who stood against it." At that moment, a musket cracked from across the river. The shot echoed like thunder, and Nobumasa staggered, blood blooming across his chest. The men froze. Even the enemy seemed to pause. The river carried the sound of his fall. And then Ichiro screamed, a sound that tore through heaven and earth alike. The dying flame of Anegawa blazed once more. The musket's echo faded into the wind, leaving only the river's breath, slow, mournful, and heavy with the weight of souls. Nobumasa lay upon the wet stones, his blood mingling with the Anegawa's current. Ichiro knelt beside him, trembling, his hands pressed against the wound that would not close. "Stay with me, my lord," he whispered. "The battle isn't done." Nobumasa's eyes, once sharp as forged steel, now gleamed with something softer, the reflection of a life spent beneath the sun of endless wars. "Listen to me, Ichiro," he rasped. "A commander's duty is not to live. It is to make death meaningful." Ichiro shook his head, tears cutting through the grime on his face. "You've already done that." A faint smile crossed Nobumasa's lips. "Then finish what I began." His hand gripped Ichiro's wrist, the strength of his spirit defying the failing flesh. "Lead them. Let no man say we fought in vain." And with that, the last breath left him, soft as a sigh carried by the mountain wind. Ichiro rose slowly, the world around him blurring into color and sound. Screams, steel, and water. He lifted Nobumasa's sword, the blade heavy with memory. The men saw it and knew their captain had fallen. Yet his will lived on in the trembling hands of his student. He turned to the 20 who still stood. "Nobumasa is gone," he said, his voice raw but steady. "But his spirit has not left the river. Look around you, this is our shrine now. Every drop of blood we spill sanctifies it. The gods are watching, brothers. Let them see how samurai die." They roared, a sound not of men, but of beasts refusing extinction. The remaining warriors surged forward, striking with inhuman ferocity. The Oda soldiers faltered. Some even turned to flee, haunted by the sight of eyes that burned brighter than life itself. Ichiro fought as though possessed. His movements no longer belonged to the world of mortals. Each strike exact, inevitable like fate itself. He carved a path through mud and blood, his cries carrying over the din like thunder. Around him, the men followed, their blades singing a requiem for all who had fallen before them. Lord Sakuma's banner wavered as his officers hesitated. "They cannot still be fighting," he snarled. But even from the ridge, he could see it. The impossible sight of 20 men breaking an army's heart. Ichiro mounted the ridge through sheer will, cutting through the commander's guard. His armor was shattered, his skin torn, yet his steps were steady. When he reached Sakuma, the Lord stumbled back, stunned not by fear, but by awe. "You are no man," Sakuma breathed. "You are death itself." Ichiro raised the blood-soaked blade. "No," he said softly. "I am his student." The sword fell. The Oda commander's banner dropped into the mud. A silence swept over the battlefield. The roar of the last lion had ended, but its echo would never fade. The valley had fallen silent, save for the whisper of wind and the groan of the wounded. Smoke curled over the Anegawa like incense from a dying temple. Ichiro stood where Sakuma's banner had fallen, the Lord's lifeless body at his feet. Around him, only 15 samurai remained, torn, bloodied, unrecognizable beneath the grime and ash of battle. They had no formation left, no reserves, no hope of retreat. Yet their hearts beat in rhythm with the same, unyielding pulse. Below, the enemy gathered once more, leaderless, enraged, desperate to avenge their slain commander. 2,000 blades gleamed in the half-light of the afternoon, forming a steel tide that began to rise again. Ichiro gazed upon them, his eyes hollow, yet burning with calm fire. "They will come until the world itself breaks," he murmured. "So let us break it first." One of the older samurai, his face masked in dried blood, coughed a laugh. "You mean to strike their heart again?" Ichiro nodded. "Their camp, their command tents. They think the river protects them. Tonight it burns." He looked toward the willow grove, the same one Nabumesa had used for the trap. The flames from earlier still smoldered, low but alive, like sleeping dragons in the ash. As dusk approached, Ichiro and his warriors moved silently through the reeds, ghosts beneath a scarlet sky. They carried torches made from broken spears, their armor wrapped in wet cloth to muffle the sound. Behind them, the river glowed faintly, reflecting the setting sun like blood upon a blade. When they reached the edge of the enemy camp, Ichiro raised his torch high. "For Nabumesa," he whispered. The torches flew through the air. In seconds, the camp erupted in chaos. Tents igniting, gunpowder stores exploding in bursts of light and thunder. The firestorm roared across the riverbank, swallowing men and banners alike. The Oda soldiers screamed as their own munitions turned against them. Horses fled, dragging burning canvas into the ranks. Amid the inferno, Ichiro and his samurai struck, silent shadows within the flame, cutting through confusion like blades through smoke. One by one they fell, but each took 10 men with him. The river blazed, its surface reflecting the fire of their defiance. Ichiro reached the central pavilion, the war council tent, now engulfed in flames. A musket shot grazed his shoulder, another struck his side. He barely felt them. Inside, he saw the enemy's banner still standing, half-burnt but defiant. He seized it, tore it from its post, and drove it into the ground, replaced by Nabumesa's blood-stained standard. "This river belongs to the dead," he said, "and we are its keepers." Moments later, the final explosion tore through the camp. The sky split open with fire. From miles away, villagers would later say they saw the Anegawa burn, as if the gods themselves had descended to cleanse it. When dawn rose again, the invaders had vanished. Only ashes, broken armor, and a single banner remained, fluttering over the river that had become a grave and a legend. The dawn after the inferno came pale and cold. The once roaring Anegawa now drifted quietly, its waters gray and swollen with ash. The air smelled of burnt silk, iron, and sorrow. Smoke still curled from the blackened riverbanks where tents and bodies had become indistinguishable. From the ashes rose only 3 men. Their armor was shattered, their faces hollowed by exhaustion, their eyes stripped of everything but memory. Among them was Ichiro, his left arm bound by torn fabric, his steps heavy, yet unbroken. They moved through the ruins like monks through a ruined temple, their feet stirring the remains of 2,000 dreams. Everywhere they looked, there was silence. Not the peace of victory, but the hush of something sacred. Ichiro paused by the water's edge, where Nabumesa had fallen. The river had erased all trace of him, but Ichiro knelt nonetheless, pressing his forehead to the wet stone. "Sensei," he murmured. "The tide remembers." The others joined him. For a long moment, they stayed that way, 3 warriors kneeling in prayer amid the wreckage of empires. When they rose again, their bodies swayed like the reeds in the wind, yet their spirits stood as mountains. By mid-morning, villagers from the surrounding hills began to creep into the valley, drawn by the smoke and the stories carried on the wind. What they found silenced them. A river turned to black glass, banners burned to threads, and in the center of it all, one crimson flag fluttering stubbornly against the morning breeze. An old farmer whispered. It was said 80 men stood against 2,000. Another shook his head. No, they were not men. They were the mountain's ghosts. Word spread quickly, from the rice fields to the castle towns, from the temples to the markets. Poets began to sing of the Battle of Anegawa, where honor drowned the tide of numbers, and courage burned brighter than the sun. The lords of the land, upon hearing of the devastation, sent scouts to confirm what they believed to be myth. But when they reached the valley, they found the truth written in blood and silence. One scroll recovered from the ruins, believed to be Nabumesa's, contained only a single line of calligraphy. When the river swallows the brave, it remembers their names longer than any man. Ichiro and his 2 surviving comrades disappeared into the mountains soon after. Some say they became monks, living in silence near the waterfalls of Ekizan. Others claim they wandered the land as swordsmen without masters, guardians of forgotten graves. But the songs remained. Every generation, the children of Anegawa recited them by the fire, their voices soft yet unwavering. 80 blades against 2,000 spears, and the river carried their courage to the sea. The wind over the valley still sings that refrain, even now. And when the mist rises at dawn, some swear they see shadows upon the water, the silhouettes of men who never learned how to surrender. Many years passed. The land of Omi healed, though its soil still remembered the taste of iron. Villages rose again where the ashes once smoldered, and the willows returned to the riverbank. Taller, their branches heavy with whispers. The Battle of Anegawa became legend, retold in the songs of children and the prayers of old soldiers. And one mist-shrouded morning, when the air smelled of rain and spring grass, a lone traveler came down the mountain path. His steps were slow, uneven. His hair, white as the river foam, fell over a face carved by time and loss. He carried no armor, no banner, only a worn sword wrapped in faded silk. It was Ichiro. He stopped where the water curved gently around the stones, the very place where Nabumesa had once stood. The years had not dimmed the sound of that day. He could still hear the clash of blades, the roar of fire, the voice of his master calling through the storm. Ichiro knelt by the river and placed the sword upon the ground. "Sensei," he whispered, "I have kept the promise. The world remembers." The mist thickened, swirling over the water like breath upon a mirror. Slowly, shapes began to emerge, faint silhouettes of armor and banners, gleaming softly in the pale light. 80 figures stood across the current, their faces hidden, their forms luminous and still. Ichiro did not flinch. He bowed deeply, tears slipping down his weathered cheeks. "You waited. A voice drifted across the river, calm, distant, and familiar. We never left. The river carries us still. For a moment, the world seemed to pause. The wind stilled, the birds fell silent, and even the current slowed, as if time itself bowed before the memory of those who had given everything. Ichiro drew his final breath and smiled. Then I will cross it at last. He stepped into the water. The river rose to meet him, cool and gentle. Each step grew lighter until he stood among the 80, no longer old, no longer weary, but as he had been that day, young, fierce, alive. Nobumasa approached, placing a hand on his shoulder. You led well, he said. Chiro bowed. I only followed your light. Together, they turned toward the mist as it began to fade into dawn. The spirits moved as one, a quiet procession vanishing into eternity. The river rippled once, then stilled. When villagers came later that day, they found only the sword, polished, untouched by rust, resting beside the water. They built a small shrine there, its plaque engraved with a single verse. The river forgets no courage, and the mist hides no names. Each spring, when the fog returns to Anegawa, the willows bend low, and those who listen closely swear they can hear it. The faint rhythm of drums, the cry of 80 souls, and the whisper of a student who kept his promise. The legend endures, for the river never forgets.